Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Hello.
Today, we are going to break something you use, every single second of every day. Your language. We are talking about Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Not your typical philosopher.
No, not at all. He wasn't some guy in a velvet armchair. He was more like a mechanic. He basically popped the hood on human communication and just heard this knocking sound in the engine.
A knocking sound, yeah. He argued that we're constantly being tricked by our own words.
Constantly. That we confuse words like beautiful with correct, and this is the really controversial part, that our modern obsession with science and psychology might just be a new kind of mythology.
We think we're being so logical.
Right. But we're actually just looking for a story that, feels good.
Just a bit of a wake-up call, really.
Yeah.
Wittgenstein's argument is that we're all walking around with this toolbox, our language,
Right.
but we're trying to use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail.
And then we wonder why we're so confused about art and God and even our own minds.
Yeah.
So today, we're going to unpack that toolbox. We'll look at why Freud was maybe a great storyteller, but maybe not a great scientist.
And why we sometimes treat the laws of physics like a religious text.
Yes. But before we start taking everything apart, I have a quick request. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button.
It really does help.
It helps us keep these deep dives coming, and it helps other people find the conversation. So thank you for that.
Okay. So let's open the toolbox.
The first tool we need to look at is, well, it's actually a trap. It's the word beautiful.
Yes.
In the lectures we read for this, Wittgenstein just seems so incredibly frustrated with this one word, like he wants to grab it out of our vocabulary.
He is, because beautiful creates what he calls a grammatical illusion.
A grammatical illusion? What do you mean?
Well, think about how we use it. We say the red apple or the round ball, right?
Yeah.
We use it as an adjective.
In the beautiful picture, same structure.
It's exactly the same structure. Now, when you say the red apple, red is a property of the apple.
Yeah.
You leave the room, the apple is still red. It's objective.
Okay.
The problem is our grammar tricks us into thinking beautiful works the same way. We say the beautiful picture, and our brain thinks beautiful is a property of the canvas, just like red is.
But it isn't.
Wittgenstein argues, no. He says, look, if you want to understand a word, don't go to the dictionary. Go to the nursery.
To a toddler.
Yes. How does a child learn the word good or beautiful? Are they taught a complex definition?
No, of course not. It's usually about food or a toy they like.
Precisely. A child eats a cookie, they smile, they make a happy sound. The parent then says, good or beautiful.
So the word is just a stand-in for the happy sound.
It's a replacement for a facial expression. It's a gesture. It's an interjection. It's basically just a slightly more sophisticated grunt of delight.
That's a little embarrassing for us adults standing in museums stroking our chins.
Oh, well.
So when I say this is beautiful, I'm not really analyzing the painting. I'm just a toddler with a cookie.
In a way, yeah. You're expressing a reaction, not describing a property.
Yeah.
And this is where his toolbox analogy is so useful.
Okay.
He says language is like a box with hammers, glue, chisels, matches. They all look like words, but they do totally different jobs.
And we get confused when we try to use a glue word like it's a hammer word.
That's the whole problem. We try to use these aesthetic words like a measuring tape, and it just creates philosophical chaos.
Okay, but I have to push back a bit. If beautiful is just a grunt, a yay, then is all art criticism just meaningless? Surely a music critic judging a symphony is doing something different than me liking a cheeseburger.
You're absolutely right, and he knows that. He isn't saying judgment doesn't exist. He's saying we're looking for it in the wrong place.
Where should we be looking?
He says if you want to see what real aesthetic judgment looks like, don't look at a tourist in a gallery.
Okay.
Look at a tailor.
A tailor? You mean like for suits?
A high-end, bespoke tailor. Imagine that scene. Does the tailor stand back, clasp their hands, and say, oh, the sublime emotion of this fabric. It is lovely.
No, they'd be fussing, pulling at the shoulder, checking the seams.
Exactly. They say, this sleeve is 2 centimeters too short. Or, the lapel is too wide.
Or, this doesn't follow the rules.
Yes. The judgment isn't about some mystical feeling of beauty. It's about correctness. It's actually about dissatisfaction.
Dissatisfaction? That's an interesting way to put it.
It is. The tailor knows the rules of the game so deeply that when something breaks those rules, it just feels wrong. It clicks, but in a negative way. For Wittgenstein, real appreciation is often about things being right or correct inside a very rigid system.
Wow, so that completely flips it. True appreciation isn't about being washed over with emotion. It's about spotting the errors in a system of rules.
In many, many cases, yes. I mean, think about a movie you didn't like. You don't just say, it was ugly.
No, I'd say the pacing was off or the dialogue was clunky.
You're critiquing it against a set of rules you expect a movie to follow. You're acting like the tailor.
Which means if I don't know the rules, I can't really judge the art.
Bingo. You aren't judging, you're just reacting. And this is where he gets into the whole concept of the game. Because rules aren't universal, they're cultural.
Right. The source material had that example of the king's robe.
The coronation robe of Edward II, yeah.
Mm.
We look at that in a museum today, and we might say, oh, that's some nice embroidery.
Right. Pretty.
But for the people of that time, the judgment was totally different.
Mm-hmm.
They knew the hierarchy, the symbols, the tailoring standards. They knew the game. We're just looking at the pieces on the board. They knew how to play the chess match.
There's that other kind of tricky example he uses about Negro art, which was the term they used in the 1930s when discussing African sculpture.
He does use that, and his point there is about the enormous gap in understanding between cultures. He's asking, can a European truly understand that art in the same way someone from that culture does?
You might put a tribal mask in your living room because you think it looks cool.
Right, you admire the geometry.
Mm.
But do you know the game? Do you know the religious rules that dictated why that curve is there or why that line is carved in that specific way?
Probably not. If you don't know the rules, you don't speak the language. I think the best illustration of this was the Russian speaker hearing an English sonnet.
It's the perfect illustration.
Yeah.
So you have a Russian person, doesn't speak a word of English.
Mm.
Someone reads them a Shakespearean sonnet with, immense passion and perfect rhythm.
Okay.
The Russian listener might feel something. They might get goosebumps. They might even cry because the sound of the voice is so moving.
But Wittgenstein would say they don't understand the poem. Not really.
Not at all. He'd say they're not aesthetically appreciating the sonnet. They are reacting to a performance. To appreciate the sonnet, you have to hear how love plays against dove. You need to understand the wordplay, the meter.
Without the rules of English, it's just emotional noise.
Emotional noise, exactly.
Mm.
So real appreciation is more of an intellectual activity than we think. It requires a cultured taste.
And he talks about that cultured taste of, say, 18th century Vienna. It wasn't just random people liking things.
No, it was a rigorous set of cultural laws. If you stepped outside those laws, it was seen as deterioration.
Speaking of which, he touches on decadence. We usually use that word to mean, I don't know, eating too much chocolate cake.
Laughs, right? Oh, this brownie is so decadent. But he's using it more technically. For him, decadence isn't necessarily morally bad. It's a shift in the game.
The rules are changing.
The rules are changing. A culture moves from a really strict style to something more ornate or loose. He might admit he prefers the strict style, but he sees decadence as just a different kind of development. A new game is starting.
Okay, so art is a game of rules. I get that. Now let's pivot to the part that I think is so relevant today. Wittgenstein's. His beef with Sigmund Freud.
Ah, yes. The heavy hitter.
It really is.
You have to remember, in Wittgenstein's time, Freud wasn't just a therapist. Psychoanalysis was like the new religion. It was the hot new science.
Everyone thought Freud had finally unlocked the source code of the human soul.
And Wittgenstein. Well, he wasn't buying a ticket to that show.
He was deeply skeptical.
Extremely. He called Freud's explanations charming.
And coming from Wittgenstein, charming is not a compliment. It's almost an insult.
It's a warning. When he says charming, he means seductive. He's arguing that Freud isn't giving us scientific causes for our behavior. He's giving us a mythology, a story so compelling we want to believe it.
Let's use the beautiful dream example from the notes, because that really lays it all out.
Okay, so a patient comes to Freud and describes this beautiful dream. In it, she's descending a hill. There are flowers. She breaks off a branch. Sounds lovely.
Sounds totally innocent. A fairy tale scene.
Right. But Freud listens and goes, uh-huh. Stop right there. This descent is about falling into sin. The branch you broke off, that's a phallic symbol. This dream is actually about suppressed sexual desire and is quite rude.
And the patient's reaction is usually, oh my God, you're right. But Wittgenstein's question is, why? Why is the dirty, cynical interpretation automatically the real one?
Yes. Why are we so ready to accept that the beautiful surface is a lie and the ugly secret underneath is the truth? He's suggesting that Freud has persuaded the patient,
Tricked them, almost.
offered a narrative that's shocking and secret, and because of that, it feels more true than the simple, beautiful experience.
So it's about persuasion, not truth. That's the key distinction, isn't it?
It is. Psychoanalysis works because it's persuasive.
Yeah.
If I tell you a story about your childhood that makes you say, wow, yes, that explains why I'm afraid of spiders.
You haven't found the scientific cause.
No.
Yeah.
I've just told you a story that fits the pattern of your life. I've given you a narrative that organizes your anxiety. It might help you, but it's not biology. And to explain why this is so dangerous, he uses this incredibly vivid analogy.
Yeah.
The boiling man.
Poor Mr. Redpath.
Poor Mr. Redpath. Wittgenstein says, imagine we take a man, Mr. Redpath, and we boil him at 200 degrees. We boil him down until all that's left is a pile of ash and some chemicals.
Okay, that's gruesome. Go on.
Now, a chemist points to that pile of ash and says, see this is all Mr. Redpath really is.
I mean, chemically, they're not wrong. All the ingredients are there.
Technically, yes.
Yeah.
But they have destroyed Mr. Redpath. They've destroyed the person, the structure, the life. Wittgenstein says Freud does the exact same thing.
He boils us down.
He boils down love, creativity, ambition, fear, all of it, into these base chemicals of sex and aggression. He points to the pile and says, this is all you really are. It's a reduction that just obliterates the human experience.
That's such a powerful image. It's like saying a great painting is really just some pigment and oil. You're missing the entire point.
Precisely. And this gets us to the final big idea here, which is about belief itself.
Yeah.
Not just in God, but the idol worship of science.
Yes, the click. Let's talk about the click. That feeling when an explanation just fits.
That feeling is crucial. We confuse that little click of psychological satisfaction with scientific proof. Wittgenstein compares it to a key sliding perfectly into a lock.
It feels so good. The mystery is solved.
It feels great.
Mm-hmm.
But he warns that this click is an aesthetic satisfaction. It feels good. That doesn't mean it's the truth.
So the more satisfying an answer feels, the more we should maybe be a little suspicious of it.
A little suspicious, yes. He talks about our desire for super mechanisms. We seem to have this deep-seated need to believe the world is made of rigid, predictable logic.
We replaced God with a machine.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. We want to believe there are these super hard laws under everything. We look at an engine and think, this gear must turn that gear. But he reminds us that even steel can bend. We project this idea of a perfect machine onto the world because we crave that order.
And he even applies this to Darwin. Now that surprised me. He's not denying evolution, is he?
No, he's not a creationist. He's analyzing why people accepted Darwinism so quickly and so passionately. He argues that when the theory was first published, the actual evidence was, still pretty thin on the ground.
It wasn't overwhelming yet.
Not at all. But people bought into it immediately. And he asks, why?
Because it was charming.
Because the idea of a single uniform principle that explains all of life, from an amoeba to a person, was incredibly charming. It made the messiness of nature look like a neat, orderly progression. We fell in love with it because of its aesthetic appeal, its elegant simplicity.
So we treated it like a divine law, just without the divinity.
Exactly. It's the idol worship of science. He goes after the physicist James Jeans for his book, The Mysterious Universe.
What was his issue there?
Jeans was writing about the universe as if it were a giant mathematical mind, like it was made of pure thought. He was basically turning math into God.
And Wittgenstein hated that.
Hated it. He saw it as taking the tools of science, math, measurement, and turning them into a religion. It makes science a superstition when you worship the equations instead of using them to build a bridge.
It seems like his whole mission, whether he's talking about a suit or a dream or an equation, is to tell us, just calm down, look at what you're actually doing.
That's the core of it, yes.
Mm-hmm.
We are so desperate for a perfect system, a God, a Freud, a law of physics, that we stop looking at the reality that's right in front of our faces.
We're pattern-seeking animals.
And we want the suit to fit the rules, the dream to have a secret, and the universe to follow one simple equation. He's not saying we can stop doing that, but he's demanding that we at least notice we're playing a game.
So after all this, boiling men, confused tailors, the idolatry of math, what's the final takeaway for us?
I think it's about humility and awareness. When you say something is beautiful, just recognize you're playing a cultural game, not measuring a physical thing.
And when you accept a psychological explanation,
Ask yourself, is that a scientific cause? Or is it just a really good story that organizes your feelings?
don't be seduced by the charm of a simple answer.
Exactly. Don't let the satisfaction of the click stop you from asking more questions.
Yeah.
Just because the key fits the lock doesn't mean you've opened the right door.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. We talked about finding the reason for why we do things. Wittgenstein suggests that more often than not, we act first, and then we invent the reason later to make sense of it all.
We're retrofitting the logic onto our own lives. That's a disturbing thought.
It is. So, the next time you explain why you did something, why you bought that specific car, or why you lost your temper or chose that job, ask yourself this. Have you actually found the cause? Or have you just found a really good story that makes you feel comfortable with what you've already done?
That is the uncomfortable question.
And that's where we'll leave it. Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
See you in the next deep dive.